Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bas Eickhout. I'm chair of the delegation of the European Parliament. And next to me, I don't think I need to introduce him further, but he's the first executive vice president of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. And we will talk in this session about the Fit for 55 package. And for those who do not know, that's Europeans' climate effort to reduce our emissions by 2030, but not only reducing emissions, also increasing renewable energy and, of course, also energy efficiency. And that package also delivers opportunities for international negotiation, talking about revenues, etc. So in that sense, all these elements will be discussed. What we will do today in this session is that Frans Timmermans will do a keynote speech on the matters, and then we will change the setting here, and then we will swap to my colleague from the European Parliament, Mohamed Shahim, who will then do the moderation of a panel discussion. So that's how we will do that. Just remind everyone, it's probably better to put up your headphones, because there's a lot of noise behind, and it's really a much better sound for all of us if you put that on. And of course, I also welcome audience at home, or at least online. Whether they are at home, we do not know, of course. But we have participants here, and we do have participants also online, and welcome there as well very much. Now, without further ado, I think most important where you want to come from is for the panel discussion and, of course, the keynote speech by first Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. It is my pleasure to say a few things about Fit for 55 and why is that important here in Sharm-el-Sheikh at COP. Because I believe honestly that if you want to be credible on the international scene, if you make pledges to decarbonize your economy, to move towards net zero, as we call it, climate neutrality in 2050, you have to be able to back that up with concrete plans and concrete legislation that actually gets you there. We discovered very soon in the process that if you want to reach climate neutrality in 2050, you have to start really moving right now. And that's why we projected a trajectory that would get us there. And to get us there, we would need to reduce our carbon emissions with at least 55% by 2030, hence the title Fit for 55. So we have a whole host of legislation that is being discussed now with our co-legislators, the Council of Ministers, where the member states are represented, and the European Parliament. They need to decide on this legislation that will actually deliver on 55% emission reductions by 2030. Now, we have 3 pieces of legislation already agreed in the last 2 weeks. And one is got the most attention, is about ending the production of CO2 emitting cars, so in fact ending combustion engine vehicles by 2035. And then we also had new agreements on how the efforts to get to this reduction is shared among the member states. And we also adopted legislation to increase actually the capacity of our natural environment to absorb CO2 emissions. So all of that combined already takes us beyond the 55% reduction in 2030. I would not be able to say exactly, pinpoint it to exact number what this means, but I think in a ballpark figure, you could say it will take us to at least 57% reduction by 2030. Now, many will say that is not enough, and I understand that argument. But we also have, and this is really thanks to the European Parliament, we have agreed that we would, along the way, evaluate whether what we are doing is still enough to reach our targets, or whether our targets are still enough to stay well, to have a chance of reaching 1.5. So it might, at some point, we might have to revisit our legislation and our targets if it would, if IPCC or others would indicate that this is not enough to get where we need to go. So why is this important internationally? First of all, as I said, because I believe this is the only basis for your credibility here, is that you do at home what you ask others to do in their countries. Second important element, I believe, is this is transforming our societies, especially because under the influence of this horrible war, this barbaric war that Putin has unleashed on Ukraine, we understand we need to much more quickly transform our energy mix into sustainable energy. So we need to go more quickly in terms of renewable energy in Europe, because that's the only energy we can make ourselves. We have very little gas left, we have almost no coal left, we have no oil. So it will have to come from renewables if you want to be, if you want to increase your own energy sovereignty. So it helps you on both sides. It helps you because you no longer rely on foreign energy imports, and it helps you because it brings down emissions substantially. And as a third element, it also brings down the price of energy, and that for our households and our industries today is extremely important with these incredibly high prices. It also creates new markets, new economies, because for the difficult to abate sector, first of all, the development of the renewable sector is going so fast. So many innovations. I'm so excited to follow that closely. What's happening in the photovoltaic industry, what's happening in the wind turbines. We're now making wind turbines that have a capacity of over 15 megawatts, one turbine. Can you imagine what this does? And this is something we need to share with the outer world. We need to create value chains beyond the borders of Europe, especially in emerging countries, especially in our closest emerging area, which is Africa, where I believe 600 million people are still without electricity. Bringing renewable energy, bringing wind turbines, bringing solar panels to all corners of Africa would have a sea change effect on the African societies, and that's good for Europe and good for Africa. So these things we are inventing, we need to make sure we share them with the wider world, and we create value chains. As I often say to my African friends, we're not here to sell you green steel. We want to help you to make green steel yourselves in the future. So that's the first, I think, contribution. This, what is an energy revolution, yields so many new developments, so many new opportunities, that this is interesting for the rest of the world as well. The second thing, because we will also be left with a lot of sectors that cannot be fully electrified. We call that difficult to abate sectors, where you need other energy sources than electricity, because you need very high caloric value or something like that. And for that, we believe green hydrogen is a solution in the future. So the hydrogen industry will develop very quickly. The technologies are developing very quickly. And this is an industry where Europe will never, ever, in my view, in the foreseeable future, Europe will not be self-sufficient. So we will also want to develop global markets. The advantage of that is that this is not something you take out of the ground that is limited to a few countries where it is sitting in the ground. This is something you can produce anywhere where there is sun and wind. So the diversification of the energy world, I think, is going to be revolutionary over the next generation. And it's going to have a huge impact also on geopolitics. There's no way people will be blackmailed with fossil fuels in the future anymore. There's no way those who sit on fossil fuels can dictate the rules to others. I think for democracy, this is also a huge opportunity, and for human rights. And I believe that, again, for Africa, with all the potential of solar and wind, potential that will go way beyond the own electricity needs of Africa, all this extra energy can be stored in hydrogen. This hydrogen can be used for the industrialization, clean industrialization of Africa, and the excess hydrogen can be sold to other parts of the world, including Europe. And I believe global shipping will quickly move to probably ammonia as the main fuel source. Shipping is one of the biggest sources of pollution, because you can burn almost anything in a ship to keep it going, and that has a huge negative effect on emissions. If you switch shipping to for instance, green ammonia, that would have a huge positive impact on the reduction of emissions. And I could go on and on about many other examples, technologies shared, but it will all depend on our willingness to look at this in a different way, to no longer see other parts of the world only as our competitors, but also as part of value chains that we need. It will create, especially in our neighborhood, and then I mean the wider Mediterranean plus Africa, it will create new forms of economic cooperation, which I think are beneficial for that wider region, and perhaps could also be beneficial for other parts of the world. You will see later this week some of the agreements we will have on hydrogen with Egypt. Already last week that was done, and tomorrow we will have more examples. But this, I think, is an exciting new possibility, and I think it will shatter our vision of how energy is treated, has been treated for the last 200 years. We will start looking at this in a different way. Final comment I want to make, going back to the initial point, why is it also good for us to be able to say this at COP? Because recently stories have been spread of Europe backtracking, of Europe no longer wanting to achieve its goals, of Europe going for fossil and killing the Green Deal. Now we can simply prove, thanks to the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers, that this is untrue. Simply by the decisions we've taken, we can show that's not the case. And so it's not just me saying, no, it's not true. I can prove it. I can back it up. And that's also the power of Fit for 55. And I would urge everyone, especially the members of the European Parliament here present and others, to not be shy about explaining to everyone, Europe is not backtracking. We're actually increasing our efforts, not decreasing them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that will bring us now to the second part of this session, which will be moderated by my colleague, Mohamed Shahim. Thank you very much once again, Frans Timmermans. Thank you.
So welcome everyone to the second part of this session. My name is Mohamed Shahim, a member of the European Parliament, and also a Dutchman, like Bas and Frans. Unfortunately, we still have to do it in English, and my voice is not really well. But that was because I spent a couple of days in Cairo, and I must say that air quality is really a good reason for us to accelerate the green transition. But that's another topic. I'm here with a very distinguished panel, and we're gonna reflect a little bit on the speech of Frans Timmermans. And I have to say, we are gonna start the Slido. There will be a QR code launched, at least that's what's promised, where you can put your questions that we then can put forward to the panel. So please join the Slido, ask as many questions as possible so we can try to answer them. The first one is Dina Kisby, more than 15 years an expert in energy and climate, now working for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Amman. Ahmed Mohammed Yassin, a solar energy and environmental consultant, and you're also a EU Climate Pact ambassador. And last is Eva Peace Mikayaringa, hopefully I pronounce it well, You're an environmentalist and co-founder of LDYC. First, Dina, could you maybe reflect a little bit on the keynote that Frans Timmermans said? We heard quite some interesting talks on how we want to encourage working with the MENA region, with Africa. We don't want to import, we don't want to produce or sell you green steel. We want you to produce green steel. What are you, could you share some thoughts on that?
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for having us here. So we work on a regional perspective for the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, where we focus on climate justice, energy transition. And the beauty of the MENA region is how diverse it is. So we're speaking about countries that already, like part of the Levant, that are importing most of their energy. We're talking about the GCC countries where they have actual like oil industry. And then we're talking about a part of Africa. So that diversity actually pulls in a perfect, like let's say, puzzle where we can actually work effectively. Now with the actual Green Deal, it's perfect that everyone is actually trying to be ambitious, and we're not left out of that storyline, because most of our countries are really into the climate change agenda. A lot of our countries actually updated their indices towards being more ambitious, towards being more towards renewable energy, and towards also having green hydrogen. We're promoting for regional dialogues on how to investigate green hydrogen into industries within the countries of the MENA. Yet again, there is a lack of cooperation to some extent. So if I may, some of the challenges that are within the region, let's start locally. Most of the policies are made on political level. Not those who are setting these policies are the ones implementing them. And there's a disconnected link between who's putting the policies and who's actually implementing them. This is one. Two, the private sector is not really and fully engaged in the process of climate change to the extent that is needed. And thirdly, sometimes the dialogues are within silos, which will never benefit anyone. And going back to climate change as per se, if we go back to the convention, it's 4 pillars. So mitigation, adaptation, capacity building, and technology transfer. While for the latter two, I think everyone is neglecting them. So with the 55% package, it's wonderful that the EU is towards that, but I think there needs to be an open dialogue of capacity building and actually technology transfer for other countries to be able to cope up with that. With the actual taxation that foreseen in 2026, I think some elements of capacity building and getting people to know what to expect so that they can keep up with the process is mandatory, or at least highly recommended. If that's okay, I'll stop here.
It's more than
Thank
okay.
you.
Ahmed, as a solar engineer and an environmental consultant, the future looks really bright for you. Could you maybe reflect a little bit and also comment a bit on the willingness to change in let's say Africa and the Middle East when it comes to, you know, keeping the fossil fuels in the ground and moving towards the green future, because there's a lot of capacity and that could create win-win situations.
Thank you very much for this question. Also, I would like to echo some words from Mr. Frans about how the Green Deal is very important. I have to say that a couple of months ago, I've been visiting many, institutions in Europe to advocate and amplify the signal of one of the most important political treaties, which is the Green Deal. And why I'm saying that, because it's a true implementation to one of the dreams that we are all hoping about as a climate activist, which is it should be from the highest level to the lowest level on the grassroots initiatives till the political or decision makers. And we want to to see that the speed of something like the Green Deal along with the speed of the COPs, I think the Green Deal is faster than any COP happened. So we want to make that as a sort of on a parallel basis, to be globally working together, to be coupled together. And also I want to start, because this is about the hope that you're talking about. I've started a new initiative called Green Deal Generation to advocate for the great lessons learned from such thing, or a political body or political treaty, to be part of other initiatives working in Africa and in Egypt. I see Egypt in this as a potential to be a north gate to Africa and one of the most important countries that can influence the MENA region, the Middle East, and also the most vulnerable continent, which is Africa, in many parts of the work to combat the climate change. Such important things have been said, which is the global markets is a very important issue that we have to work on. I agree with Ms. Dina about it should be a collaboration, not a competition. And the hope sometimes is always, staggered or a little bit disrupted when I see there is, a higher voices that who should be implementing the proper climate change agenda rather than collaborating with other people. Also, the youth contribution is very important because they are the derivative or they are a part of the solution, and most of the grassroots initiatives working around in the world in the climate change and other issues like my other organization called Ballastic, working in the plastic issue, which is not really a topic that have been introduced in the COPs. So it's very important to be introduced. It's introduced bluntly in the Green Deal, so this is really great. So the youth contribution here comes as a very important driver to a better change. Thank you very much.
Interesting. I think we all agree. Eva, as an environmentalist and focusing on loss and damage, could you please reflect a little bit on the Fit for 55, the responsibilities on loss and damage? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's great to be among this panel and to be able to reflect on loss and damage, especially in this Africa COP, which means a lot. And I think the Fit for 55 package is very important to be able to translate all the legislative frameworks, such as the Paris Agreement, into actions and make sure that the commitment made by developed countries to provide loss and damage it becomes a reality. And I hope for this, because we're living in the era of loss and damage, and for us, most of the global south and vulnerable countries, we're facing the impacts of climate change, and it's affecting youth and children. And this comes with other poverty and lack of education. It has other impacts so it's important that all the initiatives to make sure that it becomes like a model for other countries also to work on, and also to make sure that it has that implementation effect that we're looking for in this COP27. And mostly, which means like having the loss and damage finance facility. Thank you.
So I'm going to say something. So I'm a member of the parliament. We support the loss and damage facility. We're quite clear in the resolution that was voted in the European Parliament. But we also know that when it comes to climate finance, and especially loss and damage, there's a big gap. I mean, the 100 billion, hopefully we can manage to fulfill the promises that were made in the past. And I think this would be, it's very important to really get it through in this COP. But those are billions. For loss and damage, we're talking about trillions. Could the intensifying the collaboration between, let's say, Europe and maybe some other regions with Africa, Middle East, could that also be a substitute, like a real investment program based on equality to maybe tackle a bit of this loss and damage? Because the issue is that if you start a conversation knowing that there will not be an outcome, that could be frustrating for all parties. And I think it's very important that we come to agreements that at least guide us towards the right direction. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, it's important that we go with an end goal, I think, in an outcome, and that's the loss and damage finance facility.
Okay.
And also there is developing countries are very clear on what this means. It means of recovery, rehabilitation. We're talking about trillions and not billions, and there have been so far no developed countries haven't been able to provide that 100 billion. But we're hoping that with the lesson learned from the 100 billion, we'll be providing the trillions that is needed, and that is based also on the needs of developing countries, also on the science or NDCs or all those report made by developing countries specifying the needs required. And I think with you're part of the EU Parliament, you can also push for that this facility is becomes a reality and that is established right here. And then for more detailed thing to come. And also make sure that the collaboration should be between Global South and Global North, that there should be this collaboration and trust between countries, and that we're moving away from the mistrust of not delivering the 100 billion goal, and we're in the era of implementation and making promise of the commitment pledges made.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you. So we are going to the Q&A session. I have some questions online, but there's also a mic in the room. So I'm seeing where the mic is. Anyone? Yes, there is a mic. Perfect. So if you have a question, it's time to stand up and ask it. And then please also to which person in the panel you would, for which one the question is. Could you please stand up, tell you briefly your name and then the question, please?
Hello, Solal Billon for ATD Force World. I'm wondering how the Fit for 55 package and how the cooperation with other countries will take into account the people living in poverty, how the participation of 1.2 billion people living in poverty in 111 countries in the world is working, and also knowing that in Europe we have 97 million people who are at risk of poverty. So how do we take them into account? How do we make sure that this package reaches them? And regarding the cooperation, how do we make sure that they are part of the discussion?
And to who do you want to ask this question?
All of
Not
them.
all of them. Not this is too simple. I think the first question it needs to be addressed by a politician. But again, but it's a very complicated question. But please, who wants to answer? Ahmed, please.
Thank you very much for this question. And if we are speaking about poverty, it's the main reason is the linear economy, because we're really dependent on really limited resources. Also, the mobilization of funds and such thing was always giving the privilege to certain people or certain group, as we have to say, especially that the politicians were not really aware about how the linear economy is damaging the planet and on the expense of the environment. But I can assure you, after many research on how the climate change jobs are created, or the circular economy, which is the answer and the key of this, will create in 20 years more than 65 million jobs, and not on the expense of the environment. So politicians should oversee this and have a sort of an analysis how to go further in that way, and also to understand that this is the only way to get a more inclusive economy and to give opportunities to other people. So and again, the answer is working on climate change. So it's not just because of the environment, it's because of our economy and not devastating the lives and making more poorer people. So this is the thing. And I'm really shocked that we have this number in Europe. So what about Africa?
Does any one of you want to reflect? Yeah, Dina, please.
Thank you so much for the question. But I think what you said is that the Green Deal reaching them, it should be Green Deal not impacting them negatively, more or less. Personally speaking, from the situation of the MENA region and with all the political instability, it's so hard when you can actually talk of economy freely, because whatever you want to do, there's always these hindrances that are coming in throughout the process. So I think at some point we need to do it Kyoto and Paris, top down and bottom up. So at some point, there has to be an open dialogue between the actual European Union and the politicians of our countries, where they would draw up the policies. But then again, these policies, when then translated into the ground, people on the ground should be engaged in the process. So there comes in the civil society, trade unions, actual community representatives, and not just the elite of the country that are actually taking the decisions on our behalf. So open dialogue, like regionally, internationally, and locally, is a must in order for us to at least reach somewhat climate justice into the process. Thank you.
It's always hard for me as a politician not to answer a question that I really want to answer, but I want to say something on energy poverty. It's very, very complicated to motivate people based on scenarios that we prevent. We usually say as politicians that the business as usual scenario is really ugly and really bad. That's why we do the transition. In the last half year in Europe, the business as usual scenario has become really ugly. The number of people in energy poverty, we could have not have imagined that possible. And I can tell you that from bottom up, people are starting to support the Green Deal, not only because they know that it will give us cleaner cities and sustainable energy, but also stable and cheaper energy. Because the fossil future is a very, very expensive future, and those that cannot pay the bill today will have bigger problems tomorrow. And the group that we talk about as energy poverty is becoming so big that basically everyone is in it. So therefore, I think the motivation is that we need to change. We need to set up a different system. And I think the Fit for 55 package is the first step, and I hope other regions in the world follow, not only with promises, but with real legislation, as we are doing in the EU. I'm going to a question that I have here. Maybe Leila is in the room, who asked the question. Could you please, and then I'll go to you. Yes, Leila, please.
Yes, hi, Leila Reo from Yes Europe. So we heard a lot about hydrogen, and it was also mentioned by Mr. Timmermans that hydrogen is the future. Now, we also heard at COP that hydrogen is also going to use a lot of energy to be produced from Africa. This energy could also be used by local population. It could also maybe decrease the price in Africa. So how do we ensure that Europe is basically not stealing Africa's energy by producing hydrogen? Thank you. And maybe Eva can answer the question first, or like the most relevant people. Thank you.
Eva, I think it's a very, very honest and good question. Yeah.
Not okay with stealing. I think the making sure that, as you said, I think the most important thing is in this Green Deal or energy package, making sure that whatever energy we're making is not under detriment of Global South. Also making sure that we're listening to different countries, developing countries have made their own proposals of what their energy looking forward, and ensuring that there is investment made in the Global South, not only that taking the resources from the Global South and then leaving loans and anything. It should make sure that there is investment, that make sure that there will be education in those countries, and making sure that is something, whatever is deal or whatever that is being decided should be also on the profit of both sides, but also on the country that is giving the resources. Thank you.
Want to reflect on that? Please. I saw some interesting studies from the FAS organization.
So we actually have been leading some regional discussions about green hydrogen, and everyone is putting so much into the green hydrogen, and I think that's wonderful. New technologies are needed, but I think they need to be tailored. Not whatever works in X can work in Y. And I give you an example. For example, in Jordan, we are trying to work on green hydrogen, but then again, we're a country with so scarce water resources. So how can we balance between our water resources and our energy resources while we have sun and wind? So that balance should be met locally first before we can actually transport on talk of international cooperation. And I think at some point, we're not against regional cooperations or international cooperations, but not to the extent or context where local resources are being jeopardized. And I think that needs to be tackled properly within the national boundaries and national policies at the beginnings. Thank you.
I think this is a very strong point that we need to incorporate in the conclusions of today. I have a question. The miss in the middle.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Hana. I'm from Youth for Climate Morocco. I just have a question regarding loss and damage because that's a question that really interests me. And I was just wondering, do you think that there should be a sort of climate insurance facility to address the impacts that are associated with the extreme weather events happening in Africa? So that's my first question. And the second one is, do you think there should be an accurate role for the private sector? That's my question. Thank you.
And who do you want? Everyone. Then I'm gonna pick someone. Yes, Ahmed, please.
So yeah, it's very important to because we have many negotiations happening at the COP27 regarding the loss and damage. Not enough, we have to say, but. The platform, the institution that you're talking about, it should have a sort of early alarm systems about what's going on, and this is the most important priority that we have to take into consideration. So most of the problems that are happening in Africa is like the drought, also at the same time, maybe after 3 months of flooding at the same time in many countries. So the extreme weather conditions should be measured with an early alarming system that allow the countries to deal with it, and also to then we can go for further with the mitigation and adaptation thing. But the loss and damage is just a slight. Having a slight portion of the finance that it's not really enough, and it needs more technology to be invested in just to have that. In Egypt, we have maybe implemented some projects related to that, especially what's happening in Aswan and South Sinai, because we have some floodings coming from the mountains. So we had this particular thing, which is funded by the EU, by the way, but we need more of this. And how we can invest this technology and shift it to better solutions. The second question is the role of the private sector, and we see that it's we don't need greenwashing. We need more investments in not because you want to PR your brand that you are working for the climate change or making your logo turning it into green. So this is we are working for climate. We need a framework. We need a concrete plan. How the private sectors, even we can talk about anything, the production, mass production. Every single company should have a framework that works in maybe 5 years, 3 years, annually even, to understand what are the themes that we have to be working on, especially in finance. So we have gaps, for example, in some minority or marginalized cities that are really vulnerable to the climate change. So what kind of finance that we need to adapt with this? And the private sector also should be, shifting his, irresponsible actions. So we can say about the plastic production, for example. Most of the private sector here in Egypt, and we can say big 2 companies are producing many plastic, but at the same time they are funding COPs and funding other initiatives. This is not enough. You should stop the source, then go further.
But Ahmed, will the private sector sell, for example, electricity to the local market at a different price rate? I mean, these are the conditions, I think, that need to be asked.
Yes, of course. If you're speaking about from the energy perspective,
yes.
It should be, coupled with the, a current economical system. Of course, I do understand. But at the same time, we should complete the triangle. We should have a legislation which support this,
yes.
A community which is really affording that type of energy, and a civil society which is raising the awareness and the behavior, yes. Along with the social entrepreneurs who have the enough expertise and technology to support this. It's just, it's collective. I know this angle is very important, but what about the other 2 sides?
Yeah. Definitely. Eva, would you want to reflect on this question, or should we go to another one?
Just want to add that insurance just have a little bit small play in terms of...
Try to put the mic a bit closer, please.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Saying that insurance has a little bit of play in financing loss and damage, and shouldn't be the whole focus when talking about financing loss and damage. It's just a little bit of the portion it provide when looking at all the tools that should be used in financing loss and damage. I guess private insurance has a just providing a little bit. So it needs other complementary options, public finance and others. Thank you.
Okay. I'm looking into the audience. I do have a question here. So, is Mr. Schulz in the building? Mr. Schulz. Not Olaf, but Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Sorry that Franz is no longer in the room. I would like to just to refer to the issue of hard to abate, actually. I'm from Germany. I'm working with a lot of clients in industry, and they're, frankly speaking, they are laggards. They are those who want to go faster, and this is the same with materials and the state of play, how to decarbonize. But we have incumbents that are quite strong in the market, so they stick to their way of doing business. So my question is, could it be that this principle of hard to abate is a bit in the way of driving more radical changes in terms of technology, because there's a lot of around, or in substitutional effects. For example, changing cement material for bricks material, which is way less carbon intensive. So this is something I would like to see you more reflect on. And maybe you can take it as a politician. You're in the parliament. This is the issue you need to address, no?
I mean, you know that we are in the middle of negotiations on quite some, let's say, sensitive pieces of legislation, and I have to be very careful when it comes to laggards and certain countries and the position they push the legislation. I believe that there should be a level playing field for companies, and we should look not only at current interests but also future interests, especially for these, let's say, existing industries, and then the dominating players within those industries. I mean, we all can identify some of them that are not innovative enough. I think the free allowance system that we have, the subsidizing carbon emissions, is not always helpful to accelerate the green transition. I mean, this is something that's not me who's saying it, it's the European Court of Auditors that's saying it. So, and there's a balance. In the Netherlands, we say, do not throw away your shoes before you replace them. We are in that situation, you know? And the next couple of weeks will be very, very important to see where we land, to create a framework under which private sectors know how they need to decarbonize for the next 10 to 15 years. So that's what I want to say. And now I'm a bit hesitant because someone has a question for the CBAM rapporteur, and I don't want to be the person speaking this whole session. But maybe the person can ask the question, but I will address it to one of the panelists. So, okay, then please, perfect. Then you get the floor.
Thank you very much. There are many different geopolitical actors trying to position themselves on the delivery of climate finance or clean tech. I'd be curious to hear from the three of you, actually, if you think that the EU has a comparative advantage or is differentiated from other actors in trying to approach partners in the Middle East and Africa regarding the quality, essentially, of their support, of their partnerships compared to other actors.
I mean, we'll just do all the three of you. Dina, please.
Thank you so much for the. Oh, this is. Thank you so much for the question. Somewhat tricky question. So for the Middle East, so for the MENA region, we definitely, a lot of the countries are actually dependent on external resources of funding when it comes to mitigation, adaptation, or you name it, under the climate agenda. And we all know that these pledges are not well fed during the global discussions, right? But when it comes to the EU, from a personal experience, I think to some extent they built up a very good relationship with the countries, build and trust, that they are actually trying to promote on projects. And maybe from what I see in our region, EU are actually investing in adaptation more than any other, which is actually admirable to some extent, because most of the developing agencies or actual financiers, they shine away from adaptation. It needs a lot of time. It's actually more toward development of the countries. But some EU like representatives within the countries that we work in actually take that role, which is somewhat impressive. Is there more to be done? Definitely there is. Is there a way to do more? Definitely from the capacity building and the technology transfer, I think EU can invest more and have more impact into those two elements. Thank you.
Eva, and then I'll go to Ahmed. Eva, could you maybe reflect on this?
Thank you. I'll not be able to specify on the EU side specifically, but I think on the general side, I think in terms of quality, it means for us more grants. And looking at the numbers, the difference between climate finance provided in terms of grants and loans, there is a difference. So I would say there is room for improvement on there. And also on the, like I said, adaptation and mitigation, the climate finance provided on the side of mitigation is very different on the adaptation. So there's also need for increasing adaptation, which is very critical for African countries. And so far also there is no loss and damage. So I guess there is still room for improvement in general.
Ahmed?
Yes, the role of the EU is, we have seen many actions happening in Egypt in terms of projects, in terms of finance. So most of the, the facts that are there are giving us a very good image about that. What is the EU is doing, also in terms of what's happening currently, and also what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. And the EU have a very good, how we can call it, as how he can market for his agenda, especially in the climate, in terms of partnerships, and he have a true approaches that he can do, and he has a very good and peaceful language with the governments on how to implement this. It's not just because of it's always about partnership, not about being the center or the hub of this. And that's what I found when they tried to start many projects in Suez Canal in Egypt, related to how to be Egypt as a center of energy for many other countries in the Middle East. So this is a very good step that we can see. But at the end, the EU has the biggest capacity of expertise and experience, and other countries who have, 27 countries are filling the gap, of course, of many other issues, but they are in a one union, they always will have a very great influence. But with this, we need to exert more efforts on how to, take it further south, not just Egypt, not just Northern Africa. We need to take it further south to South Africa. That's the most important thing. And I see this as a biggest challenge that should be overcome.
Is that a good? Are those answers sufficient? To be honest, I must say that partnerships are easily made. Every member of government likes to have a PR moment, shake hand, and present the partnership. I think the next 5 years will be very important to see what comes out of these partnerships. Because also at these COPs, promises are made easily, but it's at the end of the day, it's about the projects and the results we make. So I'm really curious to see where we as Europeans bring these partnerships, what type of projects will result out of them. Because at the end of the day, those projects will be needed to decarbonize and create much more green energy. I'm looking into the crowd again. I have some questions here, not necessarily ones that I want to answer, because they are... I can answer the CBAM question individually later. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Belinda Eddington. Actually, my question is on the Slido. I didn't realise how to put my name in. It's important that investment is encouraged between governments, but also from the private sector. But how do you manage that without increasing national debt in the countries which are already hard-pressed?
Yes? Who wants to answer this question? Eva? You said something today already about increasing the grants compared to climate finance. Maybe this. So she's asking, how can you manage that these investments do not go hand in hand with increasing debts for countries?
I think from the start, from the implementation of those projects, I think we should make sure that those beneficiaries are part of the designing of those projects and making sure that there is a balance between what's provided as grants and also in debt. So making sure the people, the beneficiaries are part of that.
Ahmed, you want to answer that?
Yeah, it's a very important question, to be honest. It's about the debts or the loans. I don't believe in it because it's like sort of an IMF, but it's green. It's a green loan. What we need here is a mutual advantage. So what can Africa and Egypt offer to the north, and how we can have a sort of a financial. What we call it a collaboration. So it's just about how we can both have a mutual advantage, and the partnership should be focusing on both countries or both sides to have the proper financial strategies and not loans or other things that gets us into another way that we don't want to. It's about collaboration.
Dina, you want to reply as well?
Yeah. I was intrigued by Ahmed actually. So just to be, I'm gonna be just a little bit prejudiced toward our region. From a climate change perspective and a climate justice perspective, we've been dealing with the 100 billion since Copenhagen, and nothing has happened ever since, right? And even the terminology, different, is totally different. It was like 100 billion annually, then by 2020. And we still haven't got there. And we are saying like the GCF is the financial instrument to the UNFCCC, which is perfect. But then again, I don't blame the GCF for not actually dispersing money because they don't have any as promised. So this is one. The actual allocated budgets and financiers are not committed to their pledges. Hence, there's no disbursement happening. Then with all due respect to the private sector, also, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the terminology again. So everyone comes in and saying like, we're mobilizing hundreds of billions. True, mobilized somewhere in space, but they never disperse. So when it comes to the actual implementation, there is the actual gap between whatever is promised and the implementation. And we can also argue that the process is so complicated to the extent that whenever a project is being suggested, it takes probably 2 years or 3 years to get the finance for it. So whatever was urgent at that time, maybe no longer urgent, or you already solved it by your budgets because it's a must, it's a need. So there needs to be a proper discussion between who is actually financing, not necessarily the GCF, but also like EU or these developing agencies that are working in the countries. There has to be an open dialogue between them and the governments to actually come up with solutions. And with the private sector, I do believe in the private sector that there have to be an engagement for them. But it has two sides or two folds. One, the legislative framework sometimes in our countries is not that appealing. So they keep changing, since it's not very palatable for the private sector. But then again, I feel also sympathetic with the private sector in our region because of the political disturbances. It's somewhat challenging for a private sector to be engaged in a process that has a high risk. So some collaboration between institutions that can cover up some of the risk on behalf of the private sector might help the process at some point.
I will go for one final question, sorry, and then I will conclude. Could you please stand, tell us your name, and then a short question, question, please.
Thank you. Eli Mitchell-Larson from Carbon Gap. I wanted to ask about oceans, because a lot of member states have overseas territories and therefore economic zones, and a lot of countries that are facing the steepest impacts from climate change have a lot of ocean exposure. So in terms of wildlife preservation, but from our end, we're very interested in carbon removal, ways to use the ocean as a way of actually soaking up CO2 that's already there. So curious if anyone has experience with projects or ideas or innovation in that area.
Ahmed, I see you nodding. Could you please answer? Please.
I've worked in this related to the plastic issue, plastic problem issue. So we have a very interesting project with the World Bank, my organization. It's called ProBlue, and to how to understand the problem of the plastic waste in the Mediterranean, also to take it forward and to amplify the signal to other countries. And one of the most problematic things that is we need to protect the marine life in the seas because it's the oxygen generator. 75% of our oxygen is coming from the oceans and our waters, and that what we need is to work on with marginalized groups sometimes. For example, in Western Alexandria, we have a group of people who do have problems in waste management, so they are just littering the plastic into the oceans, or into the Mediterranean Sea. So it happened to be that we're giving them access to information and to understand with their perspective on how to protect their, what we call it, that this Mediterranean Sea is yours. You have to protect it because it's your oxygen generator. So when they understood the problem, they had a very, very good impact on how to protect it by themselves. So we included them into the equation of implementation to protect the seas.
Ahmed,
yeah.
we really need to conclude.
Yeah, thank you.
Really
Okay, so
need to conclude.
that's what happened in a very short.
Okay, so we are at the end of this session, and normally I will conclude, but I will not do that. I will give you the floor to give one sentence, one main message to the politicians living in Europe that work on legislation. So Eva, please, with you, one sentence, one main message, all three of you, and then we'll conclude.
Transforming the legislation into action, so that will be my message.
Okay, Ahmed.
Actions times 3. Actions, actions, actions.
Actions times 3.
Climate justice is not just a historical thing, it should be a future thing as well.
So thank you very much. Let's give them an applause. And thank you all for joining, and have fun at the COP, and hopefully this COP will be a very successful COP. Thank you very much.